This episode of Film Riot is brought to you by FreshBooks. They fresh to death. Welcome to Film Riot Mondays. Today we're not answering questions. Instead, we were able to talk to Alex Buono, who's going around doing his visual storytelling 2 tour. So we were able to get with him to ask him a few questions and get some awesome insight. He had great things to say, so let's jump right to that. So off the bat, I'm curious how you got your start. Like what broke you into it? I know you went to film school, so not film school, like pre-film school. What was it that made you want to do this?
Well, I feel like a lot of people, just growing up, and for me, growing up in the 80s, watching all these classic films at the time, E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars, all those things that everybody sort of cites. I mean, for me, I was the same thing. I loved those films, and I loved the sort of, the magic of the cinema, and I just wanted to be a part of it. I didn't even know what that meant. I was just like, I want to be a movie maker, whatever that means.
Right.
I think a lot of people have the same kind of childhood when you feel that way. You're making little Super 8 films, or you're making films with your friends, you're animating your Star Wars figures, any of that kind of stuff, but I did all that stuff. And, through high school, I kind of identified that there was this thing called film school, and you could just go to school, and that's all you did was learn how to make films, which sounded amazing.
Yeah.
And so, I went right from high school into film school.
And then, of course, you went to film school, and everything's very, very different now. Like at the time, even when I went to film school, it was like there wasn't, information was really hard to get.
Yeah.
So film school was kind of mandatory in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, not totally, obviously, there was some amazing filmmakers that never went. But
it was pre-internet.
Yeah, pre-internet, whereas now it's everywhere, including what you're currently doing. This is sort of like a mentorship, city to city.
Yeah.
So what do you think about film school now, like how mandatory it is or isn't?
I feel like from a craft point of view, it's probably a lot less important than it was when I was going to film school. Because when I was going to film school, and like all these beautiful new sort of digital cameras didn't exist, and you had to shoot on film, video was just kind of starting to become popular, but we were shooting on 16mm film, and we were learning how to cut, on film, and it was this whole craft you had to learn, and someone had to have a flatbed, and now it's so much easier to get involved. So I don't think from a craft point of view it's as important, but the most important thing you get out of film school is your network. Your group of like-minded individuals who are now your best friends.
With film school and with afterwards diving in things, probably, predating film school, you were diving into things. For me, like as I go along, there's like light switches that keep flipping on. It's like, oh, shadows, use them this way. Oh, color, use it this way. Oh, story, this is why. Do you find the same thing with those light switches? And have you ever thought about like how you go about finding those, where those things are just clicking in your mind to take your work to another level? And do you feel like that's still happening?
Oh, completely. And that's a great way of putting it. Absolutely. I feel like I'm constantly understanding, after the fact, like how to do the thing I just did.
Right.
And it's tough because you're always like, oh, this time around I'm going to figure it out before I shoot it. And it's always after you shoot it. And you make a bunch of mistakes, and then you look back and you're like, oh, okay, so next time don't do that.
Right. Just reverse engineer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like everybody, that's how you live your life as a filmmaker. I mean, when Kurosawa was given the Lifetime Achievement Oscar, and he got up, and he was in his 80s, and he was like, I feel like I'm finally understanding how filmmaking works. He's a guy that had been doing it as a sort of a master for years and years and years. I just think it's one of those things that you're constantly figuring out this foreign language, But that's a great way of putting it. I'm constantly understanding, oh, that's what I'm missing. Okay. And a big, big moment for me was actually understanding like what story structure is and how stories work. Because when I got out of film school and I was focused on being a cinematographer, and I wasn't focused on being a writer or being a director or even being a producer. And then there was this kind of moment of realizing like, oh, wait a minute, like if I understood how stories work, like as a writer would, that'll actually make me a much better cinematographer. Because your job as a cinematographer, you really want to be telling the story through pictures, and understanding how stories work is like really a pretty valuable lesson to learn. So one of the things I try to like tell people in classes like this is like, we're gonna all talk about how stories work.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with how cameras work or how lighting works. It's like literally how stories work. And just understanding that will make you a better filmmaker no matter what your craft is.
Let's go into story. You have your script, and in SNL, you're jumping styles like crazy and matching styles, things like that. But even when you're not trying to match something, you get something, you see thematically what it is and all that. What do you do first when you're handed the script? What's the first thing that you're going to do to break that down?
Well, it's kind of like a conceptual process where, if I'm working with a director, I will just try to get on the same page, like visually, like, well, what are we Are there some reference points so we can just create a shorthand and start talking about what this thing is? So sometimes it's like referencing, okay, well, it's a little bit of this movie, it's a little bit of that movie, it's a little bit of this commercial or this photograph, and oh, I get it. But if we cross that photograph with that music video, you sort of get this hybrid. And then you start interpreting it through the own script and your own sort of perspective, and it becomes something new. So it's never really copying. You know, you can start by taking inspiration from something and then you make it your own. There's definitely a technical process where I'm taking a script and breaking down the coverage of a scene. I will convert that into a shot list, and then I will always also convert that into an overhead diagram. It's just this kind of layers of organization.
Yeah.
The stuff that we do at SNL, the stuff that I'm always doing, it's always kind of like on the low budget end, and it's on the incredibly fast turnaround end. And the key for me is just being really, really organized and like taking the prep process really, really seriously. Like I'm never just showing up on set and like, hey, how should we do this today, guys? You know?
Hey, guys.
Yeah, exactly. No, try that. It's like we got a plan, and we got a very like to-the-minute plan.
When it comes to, you did your pre-production work, and how involved with the director are you with that? Or what's your interaction with the director in pre-production? I know Saturday Night Live is obviously a lot different than something like a feature.
Yeah.
Or does it seem to cross over a lot?
It really depends on the director.
Right.
I've worked with some directors who are, they're not technical at all. And they really want you to just sort of do your thing and say, hey, you know, I like your reel, I like you deal with the camera, you deal with the lighting, you decide where the camera, that's why I hired you. And I'll just go deal with the actors. And that's one type of a director. Now, the director I worked with at SNL, Rhys Thomas, is he's a very sharp technical director, as well as being an actor's director. And he could shoot the thing himself if he wanted to. So he and I go over the shot list very carefully. He could pick up a camera and shoot B camera. He does that sometimes. So with Rhys, we're going over everything very carefully. This is how I'm going to light it. These are the lenses that we're using. What kind of camera do you think would be appropriate for this one? He'll have a very strong opinion about that as well. So it just depends on who you're working with.
And then in production, would you say that relationship is very similar to pre-production? Like depending on the director is exactly how it's going to go in production?
Yeah. I mean, in general, I feel like the director needs to be the leader on set. And in most situations I'm on, it's like the director is calling action and calling cut. Sometimes the assistant director will call that. I'm never the one calling that. And it's important that we all know who the boss is. And so if the director is calling for something, you want to know, okay, well, that dude's in charge or that girl's in charge. It's not like everybody then looks at the DP and says, should we do this? You know, learning your kind of role in the hierarchy of a production is kind of one of the steps you go through as a cinematographer.
What about when you have a moment where a choice feels very, very wrong right here? Like how do you handle that? That's
tricky, and it really does depend on your relationship with the director.
Right.
If I'm hopefully in prep, you've established the rapport with the director where that person trusts you. And if that director is going down a path in pre-production or on set, and you can see that this isn't going to work or that there's a better way to do it, it's your job to point that out. That's what the director is hiring you to be the backstop of that person's visual ideas.
Yeah.
In that case, though, you got to be really, really careful that you're not doing this in front of the whole crew. So whenever I feel like I'm going to tell the director that we're going to do something that's sort of contrary to what they're doing, I will quietly pull them aside and say, hey, this is another idea, or maybe we want to try this, or you cannot do it in front of the crew. If you start to undermine your director in front of the crew, you're not going to have a job for very long.
Right.
Because it starts to really make everybody question, oh, well, who's in charge here, you know?
Yeah.
And it's the director's movie or the director's project, you know? You have to kind of respect that.
Speaking of moments, do you find like when you just shift something this way or that and turn, like you were saying, just turn that light off, how often do you feel like those things are happening out of pure knowledge of do that and this exactly what happened, and how often that's happening out of instinct? Like you just feel that's right?
I think it's all instinct. I mean, certainly you get to a point where you've done it enough times that you can sort of predict.
You know X equals Y usually.
Yeah, or you know that like, look, if we bring in a key light here, I'm not going to need any fill light because there's going to be plenty of light. But a lot of it is instinctual. And a lot of times I'll be framing up a shot and I'll just go, okay, put the camera here. And I there's just something I just know that my brain is thinking like, well, that background is going to look better than that background.
Right.
But it's not this very deliberate, like, okay, step one, set up the tripod. Step two, you know, it's this definitely like, okay, instinctually, yeah, let's bring in the light from here and let's move that over there. And you are just sort of framing up a shot. And one kind of really cool thing happens when you're on a longer form thing that, say you're shooting a feature and say the schedule is going to be 18 days. You know, it's a sort of average low budget feature. Some point, maybe a quarter of the way and halfway in, the film itself kind of takes over and it starts to tell you what it wants to be. You've developed a language for it. and you suddenly know, well, all of our close-ups are framed like this, and all of our wide shots are framed like this, and then suddenly framing the shot just becomes this really easy thing.
Yeah.
Because you know the film has a look now. We frame our shots on a 70, our close-ups are on a 75, and we're framing like that, or we're framing like that. And you're just like, yeah, and set the shot up. I mean, we all know what it is now.
That's really interesting. It's kind of like an actor finding their character after a few days.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Moving away from that, moving into what you're doing here, what's like the main reasoning for you to be going around? Because this has got to be exhausting.
It's a little tiring. I don't mean to sound like super cheesy or like sentimental about it, but like when I was coming up, I had a number of mentors that meant a lot to me and taught me a lot.
Right.
Dean Cundy was a great cinematographer, was one of my first mentors in film school. Jan de Bont, who gave me my first break. Don Burgess and Jack Green, John Schwartzman, all the cinematographers that I worked for as an assistant. And they taught me how to be a DP, and they were so generous. I mean, you could ask them anything. They never made me feel like I was asking stupid questions or I shouldn't know that, or just be an assistant, don't ask me so many questions. And I just always felt like, look, if I'm ever in a position to do that for somebody else, I'm going to do it, because this is where I am today. And it's funny because I don't even remotely compare myself to those guys. Those guys are legendary. But if I can teach anyone anything about something that I've done, hey, if this helps you, here's how I do it. I've had people take a class or whatever, and they're like, man, aren't you afraid that like you're sharing all your secrets? Aren't you afraid that someone's going to steal your job? And I'm like, you know what? Steal my job. Take it. If you can take my job, you deserve it. You know?
Yeah.
One of the biggest things about my job, and one of the biggest things I try to impress upon people, is that like, you don't get a job because you know how to set up a light like this, or you have this really cool reel. You get a job because of your attitude and who you are and your relationships. And so here I'm working at SNL with like my best friends in the world. So if you can take my job, it's all yours. You can convince my best friends that like you'd be better at this, and that I'm not gonna, go ahead.
Right.
You deserve it.
Yeah.
Because all the reasons why I'm working there, it has nothing to do with all of these tricks. It's because we all have a great working relationship. I have the right attitude for the show, and ultimately people want to work with their friends. People don't want to work with strangers.
Totally.
And that's why you get a job. That's why you keep a job.
Yeah, and that makes it sort of sound difficult to sort of break into that stuff. So if you didn't go to film school and you didn't like have those networks, how would you say that you could start working into that? Just find anything and start jumping in as a PA or anything?
The main thing is to just kind of give yourself a little bit of a break and recognize that it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
This team that we have at SNL, like, it's been building over 10 years. And we have people come in, and then that person doesn't quite fit, and then they kind of drift away, and then someone else comes in, and then they're a perfect fit, and then they stick around. You have to forgive your own insecurity and your own impatience, and realize that, okay, well, this is going to take a while.
Right.
And if you can just survive, and literally I just tell people, like, just find something that pays you something. Just go be a PA, or go deliver coffee somewhere, or I was a camera assistant. I was literally just cleaning mud off of camera cases for years and years, just so they could keep paying the bills, so that on the weekends I could shoot stuff. And so I try to encourage people, like, just be patient, just like stay at it,
put in the work,
survive,
put
the work in, and you'll make it. You'll totally make it. You will. And it's a game of endurance.
Yeah.
It's not a game of like, I'm a genius and you're not, and that's why I made it and you didn't. It's a total endurance game.
Totally.
If you last long enough, you'll figure it all out, and you'll build your network, and you'll work in this business.
So let's jump back into the tour. So it really is, like I was even saying to you off camera, it really is like this city by city mentorship that you're doing. It's like this one-day mentorship that's happening to a group of people, which is awesome. And you did one before, but this one feels totally different. So what can people expect new from this one as opposed to the first?
Well, certainly I learned a lot about how to do workshops, doing it 32 times in a row.
Right.
And the focus of this one is just to be doing a lot of demonstrating. One of the big lessons was that people, they want to see it, and they don't want to just hear about it. They don't want to just lecture. So the focus of this is like a ton of very different things. So here's a bunch of very different lighting styles, shooting styles, visual styles.
Looking totally different too.
Yeah. The other thing that's different about this tour than the last one is, we have this theoretical sort of lecture at the end of the night. The last time I spoke about visual structure, and this time I'm talking about visual subtext, which is a very different subject. And for me, it's kind of the next level that we all need to get to, and I include myself in that. And that when we look at the films of all of our heroes, these amazing filmmakers, and you can break down what they're doing on a technical level, and I think a lot of people can do that. You can recognize that's a dolly shot, that's a steady cam, that's a key light, okay, they color time this warm. And we can do that ourselves. That's a lot of what I do at SNL. You know, I'm just sort of saying, okay, I can be a detective and figure out what they did. But at some level, you step back and you go, well, hold on a second. I just did that same thing that they did. It looks exactly like their thing. But for some reason, it doesn't work the same way. It doesn't resonate as deeply. It doesn't mean as much. And why is that? Like, what's going on? Why do my heroes, why do their films resonate so deeply and mine don't?
Right.
And I think a lot of people are wondering that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Know? And for me, I truly believe that there's something going on this subtextual, subconscious level that deepens the meaning of our heroes' films that we're not doing yet.
Right.
And so that's what I want to get at in this subtext lecture is what's going on below the surface? What are they doing to deepen the meaning of their film that is beyond where they put the camera and how they set the light and how they set the exposure? Because there's a lot going on a subconscious level they are doing in the design process that is sort of the next step for the rest of us to figure out, oh, wow, that's deep, man, and that is what they're doing. And it's hard to do, but you have to recognize that is what's separating the sort of the greatest films of all time from everything else.
Yeah. Which
can be well crafted, but not quite as resonant.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, I'll let you get back to the class.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Right
You were awesome.
Thanks.
FreshBooks makes things simple, but their specialty is to make your life easier when it comes to invoicing, getting paid, and tracking expenses. If you're doing any freelance work or have a business of any kind on the side or full time, you need to know about FreshBooks. It's an online tool and the absolute easiest way to get all your accounting done super fast. Everyone dreads doing stuff like sending invoices and getting your numbers straight, but that's where FreshBooks really makes it simple. Your clients pay you online, your expenses are automatically tracked as you spend, and all the little details about cash flow are in one place so you know where you stand. You can even see full history of any invoice so you'll know if your client has looked at your invoice or not. So head over to freshbooks.com/FilmRiot and don't forget to enter FilmRiot in the How Did You Hear About Us section. So that's it for today. A big thank you to Alex Buono for taking the time to talk to us. My suggestion of the week is his tour. We are not paid to say this. We have no affiliation with MZ or Alex Buono and his tour at all. We just really love the tour. It really is, like we said in the interview, a city-by-city, one-day mentorship where he's being more honest than I've seen anybody at his level ever be, talking about the mistakes he made and tons of other things that went into it. It was really fantastic. So if you have the money and time, absolutely check it out. He's only midway through the tour right now, tons of cities left, so check that out right here. It is 100% worth your time. And of course, this Thursday, we have a full breakdown of the day, sort of a review of the class coming as well. So we'll talk about it a little bit more on Thursday. But until next week, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.